Uri Manor does more than one thing at the Salk Institute. On one hand, he's a specialist in microscopic photography. Recently, he showed me a hallway near his office that is lined with his photos of cells. One photo shows so-called hair cells that inhabit the inner ear and vibrate in response to sound, sending signals to the auditory nerve. Problems with those cells can cause deafness, and that is what Manor, a cell biologist, studies in his lab.
You can imagine then that if just a little mistake or a little alteration in the instructions, which is the DNA, on how to construct that hair can cause it to have a different enough shape that it no longer functions properly.
Uri Manor has been profoundly hard of hearing since birth. He has never been able to hear properly without hearing aids, something his parents realized when he was 2 years old and still could not talk. And though he is not deaf, he knows what it's like.
As someone who wears hearing aids, I actually kind of go back and forth between the two worlds of deaf and hearing, because when I turn my hearing aids off, it's over. I don't hear you anymore. So I kind of know what that's like.
Deafness and being hard of hearing takes many forms. We all lose hearing with age. Loud music and our noisy, mechanized society also damage hearing. Manor inherited from his parents, who were not hard of hearing, the genes for profound congenital hearing loss. One member of Manor's lab, research scientist David Rosenberg, lost his hearing in one ear. He remembers when it happened in college.
I was sitting for a physics exam and heard this very loud ringing. Turns out that the ringing was coming from my head, from my ear. And it was the first sort of symptom I had of a vestibular schwannoma.
Meaning a tumor had developed on his auditory nerve. It was surgically removed, but by then he had basically lost hearing in his right ear. He remembers talking with the surgeon after the tumor was removed. The doctor rustled his fingers next to the damaged ear.
And I think at the time I had some residual hearing, but it wasn't the same on both sides. So when he did that test and I was like, yeah, I can hear it a little bit, he said, good. And then he walked away. And so that kind of left this impression on me that like, oh, I'm fine. But the reality is I wasn't fine.
Rosenberg and Manor are now writing a grant proposal to fund research that could find a way to prevent the growth or even shrink those tumors by implanting in people a working copy of a crucial gene.
Hi, Ada.
Hi, Ada.
A video produced by the Mayo Clinic shows a woman holding her deaf baby who has had its cochlear implant turned on for the first time, allowing her to hear her parents' voice. The baby smiles. Manor, the father of 4 kids, says seeing a similar video caused him to break down in tears.
Hello.
But he says some reactions to it on social media were very negative, including one that called it cultural genocide. That's a common term that suggests efforts to cure deafness are undermining a community that has its own language and ways. The California Association for the Deaf didn't respond to my effort to get them to comment. Manor says for deaf people, sign language, the culture, and the deaf community.
For many of them, it's been a lifesaver. If they didn't have that, many deaf people don't know other deaf people until they become adults. And then they join a deaf community, and then they have this whole world of technology and language and people who understand them. And many of them feel that, this idea of curing or treating or whatever, or even calling them disabled is offensive.
Manor says he's become careful to say he is not trying to cure deafness. He's trying to give people the option to be able to hear. Babies these days don't have to wait until they're 2 for their parents to realize they are functionally deaf. Now, tests are done on newborns.
I have pictures of my daughters in the hospital wearing special headphones that can measure whether their ears are working properly.
He says the gene mutations that cause deafness are recessive, which means kids have to get them from both of their parents to be affected. Manor says none of his kids are hard of hearing. Thomas Fudge, KPBS News.
never seen that face before.